Hi everyone, welcome back to Tiny House and Off-Grid Resources. Sorry about the wank camera angle, but it seems that my kitchen just seems to be getting smaller and smaller as the months go by. I really want to share this with you. I discovered something from a Belgian baker that has changed the way I make bread. I started making 2 loaves of bread at a time about twice a week. Small loaves, just for me and the girls. And the first loaves, they were a bit biscuity. As time went on, I got a little bit better and it progressed into something that was a little cakey. Finally, after several weeks, I managed to create something that would pretty well pass for a loaf of bread. But down in the next town, Mount Maunganui, we've got a Belgian baker. And I thought I'd go and have a quick chat with him. And he asked me how I was preparing my dough. And I said, well, I'm preparing it according to the recipe that I find in all the books. And something I never found in any of the books is something that this Belgian baker taught me just a couple of weeks ago. Nothing extra gets added into the mix. It's still a delightfully simple 4-ingredient bread recipe, but the Belgian baker has helped me to create a loaf of bread that far surpasses anything that I've been making in the past. I've got to share this with you. So pay attention, here we go. Now, the recipe that I'm going to be sharing with you is the same recipe that I've always used. The ingredients list that I'm going to put up in the comments below will be for 1 loaf of bread, but I'm actually going to be doubling those amounts because I prefer to make 2 loaves at a time. So in the bowl, I've got 6 cups of flour. I'm going to refer to it in the recipe as 3 cups of flour because we're referring to a 1 loaf recipe. So in here, I've got the 3 cups of flour and 1 teaspoon of salt. I'll just mix those 2 together. And before I start with anything, I'm going to do this one simple trick. I'm going to take 1 cup of the mixture and put it into a separate container, and then I'm going to get 1 cup of boiling water and quickly mix that into a thick paste. You have to work quickly so you don't end up with a glue. But what we're doing here is something that's a little similar to creating the starter that you use in sourdough bread. It changes the chemical reaction. Now, by beating this into a paste, we're changing the structure of the flour. By changing the structure of the flour, it's going to allow us to include more liquid in the mix. So what we're going to do with this is mix it up into a fluffy paste and just leave it to cool down. The consistency we're looking for is like mashed potato. There we go. Now I'm just going to leave that to sit here until it reaches room temperature, and then I add that back into the mixture with the rest of the ingredients and complete the mix as I would normally. So this is what Anton tells me, that by scalding a portion of your flour, you're altering the structure of the gluten, and it enables it to open before it's cooked and accept more moisture. That means that I can add almost an extra cupful of water to this mixture without affecting the consistency of the mixture, and that gives us a lighter, more resilient, softer dough that ultimately increases the shelf life of the loaf and makes it an awful lot more pleasurable to eat. So all we're going to do is put this back into the mixture, mix it in, and we're going to add the usual amount of water, which is 1.5 cups of water per loaf. And then we continue making the bread in the same way. Now that this is in and getting mixed, the next thing I need to do is to add the yeast. Now my little trick with the yeast is I use warm water to dissolve the sugar. I put in 1 heaped teaspoonful of sugar per loaf. And I'm just going to boil up a little bit more water to dissolve the sugar. So after dissolving the sugar, the next thing we have to do is bring the temperature back down to sort of body temperature. Just bring it down to a nice 36 or 37 degrees Celsius so that we're not going to damage the yeast. But we do want a nice warmth so that the yeast can do its job. And we've got 1 teaspoon of yeast per loaf. So that can go into there. Now I do like to let this sit for a couple of minutes just to make sure that the yeast has got some life in it. If you grab some yeast out of the cupboard and mix it straight in and then pour it into here, you won't get that visual confirmation that it's doing its job. So even though I know this yeast is good, I'm just going to leave it for a couple of minutes to make sure that it's active. At the moment you can see that the only bubbles on there are because of my stirring, but we'll come back in a couple of minutes and you'll see that that will develop a fairly thick layer of foam on top, like a head on a glass of beer, and that shows that it's doing the business. There. Now that didn't take long, did it? Very, very beery. So we've obviously got really good yeast here, so that can get put into here. I always give it a big stir as I put it in because so much of it settles to the bottom and we don't want to lose any of that yeasty goodness. So that's 2 cups of water that I've just added. And we're going to mix that in. And the whole idea is to get as much water in here as the mixture will hold. And what we've actually done by scalding some of the flour and altering the gluten so what we've actually done by scalding the flour is altered the gluten's ability to accept moisture, and we can get more moisture into the mix. There. So I'm going to leave that to rest now for a couple of hours and wait till it doubles in size, and then we'll do a little bit of kneading, give it another rest, and then it can go into the tins and we'll give it a bake and I'll show you what we've ended up with. The dough's now been sitting for 2 hours. Let's pull the cover off and have a look and see if it's ready to go. Here we go. So what I'm going to do now is divide the dough into two and put it into two well-greased baking tins. It's a little bit hard to handle at this stage because it doesn't want to cut and it doesn't want to tear, but you can see that the gluten content has responded really well to the treatment that I've given it. We've got an incredibly bouncy mixture with very little work. I haven't kneaded it at all. And yeah, it's a little bit cakey, but as it bakes, it develops this lovely, soft, bouncy bread. And not your normal way. Most people will have it all over the bench, making a mess, rolling it, kneading it, and I found that I don't need to do that. No pun intended. So what I do now is I put these into a very slightly warmed oven, and it does a second rise in the oven for maybe only 15 or 20 minutes, and then I just turn the oven up to the full baking temperature and let it go. No mess. No hassle. 2 beautiful loaves of bread. I find that by doing this, I can get it to settle down a bit. So they can now go into the oven on a low temperature. Half an hour, not even registering on the dial. It's just, I just want a little bit of warmth in there. So I'll leave these in here for half an hour or so until the mixture comes up to the top of the pans, and then I'll turn it up to full baking temperature. The temperatures, the times, the quantities, they're all going to be in the description below, so don't worry if this all seems a little bit haphazard. It's not quite as off the wall as it seems. After 25 minutes at about 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, this is what you'll see. The mixture's climbed out the top of the pans and it's now ready for me to turn it up to baking heat. I bake it at 165 for 25 to 30 minutes. Honestly, I really just go off the colour on the top of the loaf. The lighting's just a little bit harsh in here and you can't see the colour starting to appear on the loaf, but trust me, it's starting to look very bready and I'm about to bring it out. I wish I could share the taste and the texture of this amazing bread with you, but unfortunately I can't. But I'd just like to thank Anton from Mount Maunganui Belgian Bakery for this one simple tip that has just taken my bread making to a whole new level. Please do try it. Your family will love you for it.